Richard Boone's profound and visceral hatred for Kirk Douglas wasn't merely another Hollywood feud born from professional jealousy, competing egos, or a single dramatic confrontation on a movie set, but rather represented one of the most intense and deeply personal animosities in entertainment history, rooted in a fundamental philosophical clash between two men who embodied completely opposite approaches to life, success, and human dignity, in an industry notorious for its nature and moral compromises. The origins of this hatred can be traced back to Boone's core values, which were forged through his experiences as a working-class laborer, his service as a naval aviation ordnance man in the Pacific Theater during World War II, and his subsequent dedication to the craft of acting as a collaborative art form that required mutual respect, professional integrity, and genuine human connection, values that stood in stark contrast to what he observed in Douglas's behavior throughout their parallel careers in Hollywood's golden age. Boone's military background had instilled in him an unshakable belief in honor, duty, and treating all people with dignity, regardless of their rank or status, principles that made him particularly sensitive to displays of arrogance, entitlement, and the abuse of power. Characteristics that he witnessed repeatedly in Douglas's interactions with everyone from A-list co-stars to studio grips and catering staff. Unlike many actors who might privately grumble about a difficult colleague's behavior while maintaining a public facade of professional courtesy, Boone was constitutionally incapable of hiding his true feelings, and his disgust with Douglas became an open secret among Hollywood insiders who had witnessed the palpable tension whenever the two men found themselves in the same room at industry parties, premieres, or social gatherings. The depth of Boone's animosity became legendary among his inner circle with close friends, recounting how his entire demeanor would change the moment Douglas entered a room, transforming from his usual warm, engaging personality into a cold, distant figure who would either find an excuse to leave immediately or retreat to the furthest corner of the venue, nursing a drink while muttering under his breath about Douglas's peacock strut and his insufferable need to be the center of attention. In every situation, what particularly infuriated Boone was Douglas's well-documented habit of manipulating scripts, production schedules, and even camera angles to ensure that he dominated every scene, often at the expense of his co-stars' performances and the overall quality of the film. Behavior that violated Boone's fundamental belief that great acting emerged from genuine collaboration and mutual support rather than ruthless self-promotion and the systematic undermining of one's colleagues. Stories circulated throughout Hollywood about Douglas's notorious behavior on various film sets, including incidents where he allegedly rewrote dialogue to give himself more dramatic moments while reducing other actors' roles to mere supporting functions, demanded that cameras be repositioned to favor his profile during crucial scenes, and even went so far as to suggest script changes that would eliminate other characters' important story beats in favor of additional Kirk Douglas showcase moments. Tactics that struck Boone as not just unprofessional, but fundamentally dishonorable and antithetical to the artistic integrity he had spent his career trying to maintain. The contrast between their approaches to fame and success couldn't have been more stark, with Boone viewing his celebrity status as a byproduct of his dedication to craft and his responsibility to audiences who trusted him to deliver authentic, emotionally honest performances, while Douglas seemed to treat fame as both a weapon to be wielded against perceived competitors and a validation of his superiority over everyone else in the industry. Boone's friends and colleagues often remarked on how his hatred for Douglas intensified whenever he witnessed or heard about Douglas's treatment of crew members, extras, and other industry workers who lacked the power or status to defend themselves against his alleged verbal abuse, condescending attitudes, and general disregard for their contributions to the filmmaking process, behavior that reminded Boone of the worst kind of officers he had encountered during his military servicemen, who confused rank with worth and used their authority to diminish rather than those under their command. The psychological complexity of Boone's hatred becomes even more fascinating when considering that both men had emerged from challenging backgrounds and achieved success through determination and talent. Yet their responses to that success revealed fundamental differences in character that made any possibility of mutual respect virtually impossible. While Boone had channeled his working-class experiences in military service into a deep appreciation for teamwork, loyalty, and the dignity of all honest work, Douglas had apparently interpreted his rise from poverty as license to treat others as obstacles to be overcome or tools to be used in his relentless pursuit of greater fame and recognition. Industry insiders reported that Boone's disdain for Douglas was so complete that he would research potential projects thoroughly before accepting roles, specifically to avoid any possibility of working with Douglas. And on at least 3 documented occasions, he turned down lucrative film contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars simply because Douglas was attached to the projects, telling his agent that no amount of money was worth compromising his principles or subjecting himself to what he termed an unbearable working environment dominated by that insufferable egomaniac's toxic personality. The social dynamics between the two men became a source of endless fascination for Hollywood observers, particularly at industry events where their mutual antagonism created an almost electric tension that everyone could feel, but few dared to acknowledge openly. Witnesses described how Boone would visibly stiffen whenever Douglas approached a group conversation, his famous growly voice becoming even more clipped and formal, his responses reduced to monosyllables or polite nods that barely concealed his contempt, while Douglas, perhaps oblivious to the intensity of Boone's feelings, or simply too absorbed in his own performance to care, would launch into his typical routine of boastful anecdotes, name-dropping, and shameless self-promotion that seemed designed to remind everyone in earshot of his importance and success. The irony of their mutual dislike wasn't lost on industry veterans who recognized that both men were exceptionally talented actors capable of delivering powerful, memorable performances. Yet their personal animosity was so intense that it prevented any possibility of the kind of professional collaboration that might have produced truly great cinema. With casting directors reportedly avoiding projects that might require both actors, knowing that the resulting tension would be detrimental to the entire production. Boone's hatred was further fueled by what he perceived as Douglas's hypocrisy in public statements about the importance of artistic integrity and social responsibility, positions that Boone felt were completely at odds with Douglas's actual behavior toward colleagues, crew members, and the industry as a whole, creating what Boone saw as a fundamental dishonesty that extended far beyond mere professional disagreements into questions of basic human character and moral consistency. The few documented instances where the two men were forced to interact professionally, such as industry award ceremonies or charity events where their absence would have been noticed and commented upon, became exercises in barely controlled hostility, with both men maintaining the thinnest veneer of civility while their body language, tone of voice, and carefully chosen words conveyed volumes about their true feelings toward each other. Perhaps most revealing of all was Boone's response when asked by journalists about Douglas in later interviews, where his usual articulate, thoughtful responses would give way to long pauses, tight-lipped smiles, and diplomatically worded but unmistakably negative assessments that left no doubt about his true opinion while stopping just short of actionable leal. A restraint that seemed to cost him considerable effort and suggested depths of anger that even his considerable self-control could barely contain. The tragedy of their mutual antagonism was that it represented a microcosm of Hollywood's broader struggles with ego, power, and the corrupting influence of fame on human relationships, with Boone serving as a representative of old-school values of honor, collaboration, and respect for craft, while Douglas embodied what many saw as the emerging culture of celebrity worship, ruthless self-promotion, and the reduction of art to mere ego gratification, a conflict that would only intensify as the entertainment industry evolved through the latter half of the 20th century and beyond. Richard Boone's profound and visceral hatred for Kirk Douglas wasn't merely another Hollywood feud born from professional jealousy, competing egos, or a single dramatic confrontation on a movie set, but rather represented one of the most intense and deeply personal animosities in entertainment history, rooted in a fundamental philosophical clash between two men who embodied completely opposite approaches to life, success, and human dignity in an industry notorious for its cutthroat nature and moral compromises. The origins of this hatred can be traced back to Boone's core values, which were forged through his experiences as a working-class laborer, his service as a naval aviation ordnance man in the Pacific Theater,